today's Thursday, so we talk about success for Scrum Masters. We've been sharing success stories here on the podcast since 2015, so there's a lot to learn. But wouldn't you like to learn from people with decades of experience? Well, don't worry, we've got you covered. The Scrum Master Toolbox podcast launched Tips from the Trenches, the Scrum Master edition audiobook. That's version 2 now out. There are 13 audio interviews, 3 hours of audio with Scrum Masters that have decades of experience. We've got Mike Cohn, Linda Rising, Lisa Crispin, Christopher Avery, Emily Weber, myself, your podcast host, Yves Hanul, the editor of the original Tips from the Trenches ebook, also available with the audiobook. Altogether, 13 super experienced Scrum Masters. To learn more, visit bit.ly/audiotips2. That's bit.ly/AUDIOTIPS and the numeral 2 at the end, all lowercase, all one word. So one more time, that's bit.ly/audiotips2 to learn more. And now, on to today's show. Hello everybody, welcome to our Thursday, Success Thursday, this week with Joe Auslander. Hi Joe, welcome back.
Hi Vesco.
Hey Joe, so you said on Tuesday that you love retrospectives. I mean, we talked about the Agile Retrospectives book. So today's Thursday, we start with the retrospective before we talk about success. So what's your favorite retrospective format and why?
My favorite retrospective format is probably one that I haven't tried before. For a portion of my career, I gave myself a challenge that for 6 months, I would not do the same retro twice. And so that means I had to basically invent a lot. So there were two that kind of stand out that were my favorite. One of which the team I was working with invented, which is really easy to explain. They were hardcore engineers. They weren't so much into observing the process because the process was relatively stable for them. They were into how can we work better through finding engineering solutions. So they came up with the phrase retrovations. So we use the retro to innovate. So innovations and retro put together to innovate new tools, basically, that they could build that would increase the quality and speed of their ability to deliver. And that had a huge effect on them. They did some amazing things with that. So I always like the term retrovation. But I think my favorite, most fun retrospective that I made was I tried to replicate. It was basically we were all producers on a reality television show. And it was using the open, gather data, generate insights, create actions, and close format from Esther Darby. So the conversation took that turn. So the open was welcome to this is your retro, the reality show about you, the team. And first we have to look at the last episode. And we used a combination of like journey lines and a few other sort of ways of mapping emotion and results to determine how well we thought that last episode went. And then to, I would say give them feedback based on, we also identified an audience, and the audience would be like the customer and also certain stakeholders, and saying, wow, that was a really good experience for the watchers and for yourself. We also had this stakeholder thing. There wasn't enough like product placement or, these other things to consider outside of their bubble. And we said, so with all these things considered, what could we do the next episode? So we're still going to have to deliver stuff. We're still going to plan. We're still do all that. But based on the feedback that we got from our stakeholders and our partners and ourselves, how can we make the next episode even better? And they just started writing a script for themselves. And there were a few insights that came out of it. And it was just overall really fun. It took a lot of the pressure off. They sort of ended up accidentally doing a lot of self-analysis. They thought outside of their own bubble. And they incorporated their own needs as well as stakeholder needs.
Yeah, and that is actually one of the benefits of doing retrospectives, right? It's to help teams to step outside the daily routine, the hamster wheel that many teams actually feel they are on, right? It's like this every day. A friend of mine coined the term being a slave to the backlog, right? And that's how in some teams it feels to work. So it's great that they had the opportunity to step out and actually think of themselves as participants in the reality show and kind of look from the outside in, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And a great example of how simple tricks can transform the atmosphere and the perspective in the retrospective. All right, so now we turn our attention to perhaps one of the most important questions we have to ask ourselves as Scrum Masters. So, Joe, let me ask you, what's your definition of success for your work as a Scrum Master?
I think if I had to put it in a word, it would be trust. I think if I leave feeling that trust in all directions for all people has been achieved, that's a high level of success. Now, that doesn't really translate into what you can see or anything that's measurable, but I think if I were to walk away from it going, I trust the team trusts me, the stakeholders trust the team, the stakeholders trust me, the customers trust us, and you can see that evident in their behavior. I think that's a really good thing. And that doesn't probably help very many people. That's more of like a visceral experience. If I were to walk away, I was like, that was successful. A more measurable or like seeable or experienceable thing, I think, for a team itself is basically I want to see, I think I've been successful if a team is able to demonstrate ownership and design of their process, if they actively participate and chase after their improvement, and if they are integrated and participate in their environment. Those are probably the three things that I go for, like bare minimum of success.
When you think about the ownership, design of their process, for example, like how would you identify that? What are the signs, the symptoms, the visible evidence that the team is actually doing that, taking ownership and doing taking seriously the design of their process?
I think relating a problem to looking at their processes, saying, hey, this part of the process isn't serving us the way it used to because X changed. Why don't we run an experiment and see if we change this process in some way or interact with it differently if it changes the results. So when I see them creating hypotheses on the flow of their work, on anything that they think is valuable to what's expected of them and what they're trying to accomplish, and they're playing with it. They could add processes. They could add new processes. They could create, using the definition of ready and the definition of done is an artifact. It's not a process, but using their artifacts to create better conversations. And I've seen teams do this, like in a retro, they might go, we didn't really get through as much as we thought we were going to get through. Why? And, you'd have a person on the team go, well, to be honest, the plannings we just sort of breezed through. We didn't really dig in as much. And they said, and then they would dig in a little bit more and they're like, well, what do we need to change in planning? And they said, well, let's stop trying to agree. I've had one team go, actually, let's try to disagree on the size of a story on purpose and see if that improves our conversation. And it did. So that's them starting to take ownership and realize that if they change a small bit, it can significantly get them or take away value that they may need.
Absolutely. So one thing I would add to that is that if they make mistakes when they change the process, but continue to change the process, because one of the things we talk about very often, of course, we're Scrum Masters, is how do we improve the process? But the fact is that over time, it's impossible to improve unless you make it worse sometimes, not most of the time. But sometimes you're going to make assumptions that are wrong, and then you learn and reflect. So that's something I would add to that list of symptoms, if you will, that the team is really taking ownership.
Yeah. And also being aware of their environment and how the process that exists within that. So there's a real danger in thinking that there's like this perfect process for the team, or there's this perfect state that the team's going to get to, and then everything's going to be okay. The reality is the team exists in a very complex world, and the needs around it are constantly changing. And so they need to adapt their own behavior to work within those needs constantly. And so in some ways that can work against a team, but in other ways it can really empower a team as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And empowerment is the beginning of that ownership, right? And it's not when they are given, but rather when they take it, right? When they want to be empowered, when they want to own the things that they can change.
Yeah, that's right.
That was a great sharing of what might be some critical symptoms or evidence for us to look at in search for our own success. Thank you for that, Joe.
No problem, Vasco. Cheers.
Part of a successful Scrum Master job is to help the product owner. Tomorrow we explore that critical role in Scrum, the product owner role. Tune in to learn about product owner anti-patterns, what you can do to help the product owner, and a real-life example of what a great product owner is and what made it so. Tomorrow on our Friday Product Owner episode. See you tomorrow. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.